Oh, Evelyn!
Oh, so you're still here?
We've got problems. Hey! Hey, you little stinkweed, where you been?
Disclaimer. Please forgive me now for there will be mispronunciations in this video. The Curse of the Pharaohs, or the Curse of King Tut, is an alleged curse that has been cast upon anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially a pharaoh, or at least that's what Wikipedia says. From what we've seen from movies, a curse of a mummy is devastating. The rise of the mummy coming from the words from a scroll, book, or wall text that has the mummy coming back to life to wreak havoc on either those who have awoken it or as it searches for its long-lost beloved. But that's all for cinema, right? So, what happened when Howard Carter opened the boy king's tomb, or what we know him as King Tut? And was he the only curse that flowed through the land? Let's begin with who practiced mummification. We well know the Egyptians did, as they are the most famous for practicing mummification, but they weren't the only ones. The Chinchorro people of northern Chile developed a mummification process around 5000 BC, some 2,000 years before the Egyptians, making these mummies the oldest in the world and nothing like the famous Egyptian mummies either. The Chinchorro people dismembered and disemboweled the body completely before attaching the pieces back together using straw, plant fibers, and sticks. To help preserve the body, they would cover the frame using black mud, which they would ornate and paint. These mummies weren't kept in sacred areas or protected as important figures like the Egyptians did, but instead some were kept in households as statues for some time before being buried. This would give them some wear and tears, and they would be repainted. To the Chinchorro people, this was their way of honoring their dead and to help the living mourn. Some South American cultures produce mummies through artificial and by natural means. In the mountains of Peru, scientists have uncovered many Inca bodies preserved by the dry atmosphere and extremely cold temperatures. These bodies were initially brought to the remote location with the understanding that the bodies would be preserved there. Meanwhile, in China, some mummies have also been found. Lady Chen, a Chinese aristocrat who lived over 2,000 years ago, is the best preserved ancient mummy in the world. How, you may ask? She was laid to rest immersed in a special embalming fluid that kept her tissue relatively soft. Chinese scientists have not studied her in full detail, probably due to the fact that there is some mercury component to the embalming fluids. Let's not forget about the other cultures that practice mummification, like the Guanche people of the Canary Islands, the Buddhist monks from Tibet and other parts of the Himalayas, and even Japan, the Aleutian Islanders near Alaska, and the Aztecs. But out of all these significant people, we'll be discussing the mummies of ancient Egypt. The Egyptians also had their own special processes of mummification, and if I were to explain it all, this would be a very long video. Let me just say that it depended the time period and how the mummies were processed. Did you know that the earliest mummies from prehistoric Egypt were probably accidental? Yep, dry sand and air preserved some bodies that were buried in shallow pits in the sand. It was about 2600 BC during the 4th and 5th dynasties when the Egyptians probably began to mummify the dead intentionally. Those who were mummified had to have money because it was an expensive process. So it was mostly nobility and officials, but there were the occasional common folk that were mummified as well. Even animals were mummified, mainly for religious reasons, such as sacred bulls, baboons, cats, birds, and even crocodiles. But you are here for the curses, aren't you? The most famous curse is King Tutankhamun's curse, also known as King Tut or King Tut, which I'll be calling him for the sake of respect out of not butchering his name throughout the rest of this video. The boy king, which he was also known by, lived roughly between 1343 and 1323 BC. He'd ascend the throne at around the age of 10, which is also how he got the name Boy King to begin with. Now the rest of this information is a mix of true history and some speculative, since the sources also claim the same, some true and some speculative. Writing this script was interesting because I had to go back and forth often, writing and rewriting to keep the information as understandable as possible. So let's begin. King Tut's tomb was found on November 4th, 1922 in Egypt's Valley of the Kings by Howard Carter. The number of people who were in on the unburying of the king is speculative, but apparently there were 26 people who were in the original tomb, and the number of people who passed away is also speculative. The highest profile death was that of George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, also known as the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. He was a British aristocrat and amateur Egyptologist who helped finance and sponsor the dig. This would be his last sponsorship since he was running low on the funds to do so. It was up to Howard Carter to find something spectacular, and he did. Once he found King Tut's tomb, he sent a telegram to George Herbert, or George Carnarvon, which he is also known by and will be known by in this story. George would head to the tomb with his daughter Evelyn, and would be right next to Howard Carter when Howard chipped a hole through the door of the tomb to see inside. The three of them, George, Howard, and Evelyn, snuck through a hole Howard made into the tomb that they weren't supposed to enter. They were supposed to wait for Egyptian officials. Would this be the start of a line of deaths that hysteria made mysterious and linked to a curse? Or coincidences? Several months after entering the tomb on March 25, 1923, George would pass away. You see, George suffered from poor health before he arrived in Cairo, Egypt. And when he was visiting, he got a mosquito bite on the cheek, which he cut open with a razor by shaving. He would die from a combination of blood poisoning and pneumonia. Rumor has it that when he died, all the lights in Cairo flickered out, and his dog, who was back in England, would let out a howl and die. George Carnarvon's half-brother Aubrey Herbert also passed away. He had been born with poor eyesight and had bad teeth. He would be told by his doctors that he should remove some of his teeth to fix his eyesight. I don't know if this was a thing in the past, but I believe it would be. Well, he got some teeth pulled, got an infection, and died at the age of 43 in 1923. Another of George's half-brothers, Mervyn Herbert, also died. He contracted malarial pneumonia while visiting Albania. He had died in Rome in 1929 at the age of 46. A friend of George, a Dr. Aaron Ember, was working on a book about Egypt. He and his wife would go to a party shortly after, when the house caught on fire. His wife told him to save his manuscript while she got their son. His wife and son died in the flames while Dr. Aaron Ember managed to elude the fire, but not without harm. He ended up dying in the hospital from his burns in 1926. The book he was working on? The Egyptian Book of the Dead. Like George's two half-brothers, Dr. Aaron Ember wasn't connected to Howard Carter or the King Tut's tomb. The second person to enter the tomb after Howard Carter's discreet entering was Richard Bethel. He was, or so they say, Carter's personal secretary. His death is speculative, one mentioning that he was found murdered in an exclusive gentleman's club. Another way he was found dead was from being poisoned, and another from being smothered. Either way, Richard Bethel's father died 3 months afterwards after jumping out a 7th-floor window. He was also suffering from illness, and was most likely affected by the death of his son. He was 77. Another member of Howard Carter's team who was there when he opened the tomb was James Henry Breasted. Before he passed away, he'd seen an omen. He went to his room one night and found his pet canary had been eaten by a cobra that was sitting in the cage. This wouldn't be abnormal except that it was after they opened the tomb. The cobra is a sign of protection and is a guide for spirits of the pharaohs to help through the afterlife. And even one such cobra is on King Tut's mask. James did end up dying later from a bacterial infection contracted from his last visit to Egypt. He died in New York on December 2nd, 1935. The whole canary and cobra thing may be speculative also, since it has also been said to be Howard Carter's canary that was eaten. Arthur Crittenden Mace was an Egyptologist and archaeologist when he began working with Howard Carter in 1922. He was there to help clear out King Tut's tomb. He developed pleurisy and pneumonia and had to leave in 1924. His health would not get any better. At the age of 53, he died in a nursing home. Another archaeologist working with Howard Carter when they were looking for King Tut's tomb, and may have been another one of the first people to enter the threshold, was Hugh Evelyn White. His death is very speculative, as it was said in one source he took his own life after seeing other members of the Carter's team falling victim of the curse. He hung himself in 1924 and wrote in his own blood, "I have succumbed to a curse." However, another source claims that it was the death of a close friend that sent him spiraling to his own death. Yet another source said that there was a woman who was in love with Hugh. When he didn't return her feelings, she poisoned herself and died, leaving notes behind that explained her feelings for him. Hugh would be summoned to her inquest, where on the way he shot himself in a taxi. He wrote a letter, but this one wasn't in blood, that stated, "I knew there was a curse on me, though I had to leave to take those manuscripts to Cairo. The monks told me the curse would work all the same. Now it has done so." But his brother claimed that the letter wasn't in Hugh's handwriting. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed was said to be the one who did the first x-rays on the body of mummified King Tut in early 1924. His death came shortly after at the age of 53. He died in Switzerland after abdominal surgery that he undertook to help treat the spread of skin cancer he developed as a result of his career. He died on January 15, 1924. However, I'm almost sure he didn't x-ray King Tut, since the lid of the sarcophagus wasn't raised until February of 1924, a month after he passed. A wealthy American railroad executive, George J. Judd, visited the tomb of King Tut in 1923. He would get a serious fever and die from pneumonia. Sergeant Richard Adamson, a member of Carter's team who guarded the chamber round the clock for 7 years and who was closest to King Tut's remains, lived for another 60 years untouched by said curse, as he died in 1982. Here are a few others that were so-called inflicted by the curse that never even got close to King Tut's tomb. One was Prince Ali Kamal Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who was shot in 1923, and Shirley Stack, the Governor General of Sudan, who was assassinated in 1924. How are these two linked to the curse? Simply that of King Tut's curse hysteria. They died the same years the hysteria of the curse was on a rise, and were just that, intertwined. How about a different curse that occurred at the same time? One small but hardly mentioned, and very speculative. Not a member of Carter's group, but a friend of Carter's instead, was Sir Bruce Ingham. Carter sent him a paperweight with a mummified hand inside. Allegedly, there was a bracelet on the hand that had an inscription that read, "Cursed be he who moves my body, to him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." It is unsure where the paperweight came from, whether or not it was from King Tut's tomb or souvenir, but Sir Bruce Ingham's house burnt down. He tried to rebuild it, but then it flooded. Afraid that what would come next, he got rid of the paperweight. Now you're probably wondering what happened to Howard Carter. He, who discovered the tomb, physically opened it and removed the mummy of King Tut from the sarcophagus. While he lived until 1939, 16 years after the event, he died from Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 64. Real or not, where did the curse come from? From what investigator James Randi, the author of an Encyclopedia of Claims, Frauds, and Hoaxes of the Occult and Supernatural, says, when Tut's tomb was discovered and opened in 1922, it was a major archaeological event. In order to keep the press at bay and yet allow them a sensational aspect with which to deal, the head of the excavation team, Howard Carter, put out a story that a curse had been placed upon anyone who violated the rest of the Boy King. From what Benjamin Radford from LiveScience.com says, Carter did not invent the idea of the cursed tomb, but he did exploit it to keep intruders away from his history-making discovery. Are there other curses from mummies? Well, the others I found were from Wikipedia, but I'll tell you them anyhow. It was in 1699 when Louis Pennecher wrote an account in which he recorded how a Polish traveler bought 2 mummies in Alexandria. When the traveler would embark on a sea journey with the mummies in the cargo hold, he was soon alarmed by recurring visions of 2 specters. Storms would riddle the seas and did not calm until the mummies were thrown overboard. Zahi Hawass, who doesn't believe in curses, recalled that when he was a young archaeologist excavating at Qalm Abu below, he had to transport several artifacts from the Greco-Roman site. His cousin died on that day. A year later, his uncle died on its 1st anniversary. And on the 3rd anniversary, his aunt died. That's not all. Years later, when he was excavating the tombs of the builders of the pyramids of Giza, he encountered a curse. All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in water, and snakes against them on land. May the hippopotamus be against them in water, and the scorpion on land. Even though he claimed not to be superstitious, Zahi Hawass decided not to disturb the mummies. He was also later involved in removal of 2 child mummies and a mother from Bahariya Oasis to a museum, and was reportedly haunted by the children and the mother in his dreams, which he claims did not stop until the mummy of the father was reunited with the children and the mother in the museum. Curses are scary, especially depending on your beliefs, but you know what is scarier? Real-life potential dangers. Ancient Egyptians did try to scare off grave robbers by decorating their tombs with fierce threats, but after thousands of years, new threats would be the true challenge to archaeologists and grave robbers alike, and these weren't curses. Dangerous natural gases such as radon would build inside enclosed spaces over time. Radon itself is an odorless and invisible radioactive gas that can cause lung cancer over time when breathing in high levels. Toxic molds such as Aspergillus flavus were found inside some mummies. This toxic mold can cause a number of diseases in humans. I've listed them on the screen since I can't honestly say I'll pronounce 99% of them correctly even with help. Aspergillus flavus is also allergenic and can trigger allergic reaction in people with conditions like asthma and cystic fibrosis. Infectious bacteria may also coat the walls of some of these tombs, such as Pseudomonas and Staphylococcus. I probably pronounced those wrong, I'm sorry. The Pseudomonas infection includes life-threatening sepsis and organ failure, especially if the bacteria enters the bloodstream. Other complications may occur like chronic lung damage, severe skin lesions, bone and joint infections, and/or serious eye and ear infections. The scariest thing about this though, these infections may become resistant to antibiotics. Staphylococcus infection may vary depending on the area that is affected, but common signs are skin issues like painful red boils, swollen and red skin, sores and blisters. Systematic symptoms may include fever, chills, shortness of breath, rapid heart rate, and confusion. This can also cause more severe infections that can affect the blood, lungs, heart, bones, and/or joints. Let's not forget about the absolute normal risks of extreme weather and terrain, which can cause health hazards like heat stress and, venomous animals. The movie The Mummy from 1932, directed by Karl Freund, was inspired by the discovery of King Tut's tomb. The movie was about an expeditionary team that discovers the tomb of an ancient Egyptian named Imhotep, who was buried alive as punishment for attempting to bring his dead love back to life. Imhotep would be brought back to life himself by a magical scroll being read called Scroll of Thoth. Imhotep would escape to Cairo only to appear again 10 years later, disguised as a modern-day Egyptian hell-bent on finding the woman he believes to be the reincarnation of his love. What do you think of curses? There are so many out there, but King Tut's curse is the most known. Do you think all those who passed were due to the curse, or do you think it was all hype from the media? Thank you for tuning in, and again, I'm sorry if there was any mispronunciations. God, I know there was mispronunciations. I'm so sorry. Hope you enjoyed.